welcome to Downtown Faith and to our new discussion series called The F Word. No, not that F word. Kind of that F word, actually. But yeah, we all know the F word, right? The word that makes a movie rated R, the word that lets people know they're really getting ready to fight. We understand that F word, right? But there's another F word that I want to posit to you might be more offensive. And that's what I want to talk about this series, is the offensiveness of the word forgiveness. Because I think this is true. Most people, when truly hurt or having hurt others, are quicker to react with "you," then "I forgive you," or "forgive me." I think the real F word, the real word that is offensive, if you've been hurt, is for someone to tell you, you should forgive that person. Hey, why don't we forgive? Maybe even if someone asks, can you forgive me for that? Maybe that's more offensive to you because you're quicker to say a different F word than "I forgive you," or asking, can you forgive me? Matter of fact, this happened recently. I was telling someone, a friend downtown, about something that had happened to me, and they were quick to let me know that I may not say it, but that they would say this to someone on my behalf. And I think that when we've really been hurt, when someone we love has really legitimately been hurt, forgiveness is one of the most offensive, one of the most difficult, one of the most divisive things to talk about. Because it doesn't feel like justice, doesn't feel like equality, doesn't feel like equity, it doesn't feel like the balance has been evened out, right? It often feels like there's still a debt on the table when we've been hurt. And so in this series, I want to talk about this offensive, divisive idea of forgiveness. And I think this is true, and I think it's caused too much pain and too much division for too long. So as we talk about forgiveness, this week I want to just introduce the idea, introduce some thoughts, and then we're going to really dive in over the next few weeks. So as we have a conversation about forgiveness, I think our terminology in conversations is incredibly important, right? So if we all went around to all of us, we might have various ideas of what forgiveness really is. So I kind of want to give the term and the definition that I'm operating from and that we can operate from in this conversation. You may even want to define it for yourself as you begin the conversation today. But here's how I want to define forgiveness for us. It's the conscious process, and it is a process. Let's not pretend it's not. Let's not pretend we can say something and it's over. No, it's a conscious process of relinquishing resentment with the goal of restoring relationship. I'm going to relinquish the resentment, the bitterness, the vengeance, the revenge in my heart, and instead I'm going to pursue restoring of the relationship, or this word that's used, and we've talked about it before here at Downtown Faith. I think it's an applicable word here. It's reconciliation. It's a restoring of the relationship. It's what we see that in the New Testament is equated to what Jesus did. His ministry was the ministry of reconciliation. It was taking people and God and restoring their relationship. And one of the writers in the New Testament, he said that his ministry was the message of reconciliation. This idea that God and people can be restored, and I would say that even people and people can be restored. And part of that is this idea of forgiveness. I'm going to relinquish the resentment that I could harbor and that I could hold on to, and instead I'm going to pursue relational restoration. And maybe you've heard this, and I actually was talking with someone, or people were talking about forgiveness this week, and someone said, hey, you can forgive somebody without letting them back into your life. And I thought, can we? Has this been something we've convinced ourselves is okay, but real, full, all the way forgiveness involves a restoring of the relationship? And maybe you had a nominal relationship at that, or maybe it was someone you had a deep relationship with, and the goal would be restoration. Maybe getting there in the process is tough, and it's going to take a lot of time, but that's the goal. Because I would say that there is no full forgiveness without the goal of restoration and reconciling that relationship. And so as we begin this entire series, this is our definition, and here's our idea worth discussing. It's for today and really throughout the series. Because I think forgiveness is so otherworldly, it is so difficult, I look at it this way. Forgiveness is a deeply spiritual act with profoundly physical results. And next week, we're going to get into the healing aspect of forgiveness. But the physical result this week I want to look at is that reconciliation, that putting back together, that idea that we belong together. That's one of the physical results, is that relationships are mended. And it's incredibly, incredibly spiritual and physical, right? And I think any good spiritual practice, any good spiritual teaching has incredibly practical results in our life. Now, a lot of this series came from a Dave Chappelle comedy special. Maybe you're a fan. You've watched all the stuff he released on Netflix. Maybe you're not a fan at all. But in his comedy special, The Bird Revelation, he's talking about the Me Too movement. And he's really trying to, I think, create some wisdom around that movement at that time. And he says that in relation to specifically talking about women finding male allies in this fight to expose the hurt and abuse in their life, and not just alienating men, but bring them in as allies. He says this, and it really got me, and it caused me to kind of go full on into this. He says that the answer for women in the Me Too movement, and really I think he specifically says in Hollywood, kind of his world, could be found in South Africa. And he begins to talk about Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, apartheid, and the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Council, and their work. And I became very interested in what he meant by this, because he said that by all accounts, and in Desmond Tutu's book, No Future Without Forgiveness, he says the same thing, that by all accounts, that apartheid should have ended in a bloodbath. That South Africa should have been just like any other war-torn country during a civil war, and that ultimately it could have just been the vengeance when this new power structure took place. But instead, something different happened. Something that, again, is deeply spiritual, but had profoundly physical results. What happened was that as the regime of apartheid was ended, and through a true democratic process, Nelson Mandela, who had been recently released from prison after almost 3 decades, was voted in as president. And instead of saying, we're going to seek vengeance against the white people who put us through so much pain over the last 40, 50 years, he said, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to provide a path towards reconciliation. We're going to, on this path, we're going to exercise forgiveness. And this was just, it was so unheard of. It was so powerful yet divisive. Because what people want in times like that is, well, now I have the power, so what I want is vengeance. And he said, no, what we're going to practice is forgiveness. What we're going to pursue is reconciliation, and we're going to put our country back together again. And we're going to put a process in place, because again, it is process. And as I was reading Desmond Tutu's book about this, I just could not help but just go, this is crazy. This is unheard of. This is not natural. This is otherworldly. This is deeply spiritual. This is something that we should all be looking to. And the Dave Chappelle, it's exactly right. We should all be looking to this and to the process that they put in place to heal their country. And to say that we belong to each other and we're going to forgive. That's what we're going to do. And the process included so many steps. And we're gonna kind of use it as an illustration we go back to throughout this series, because again, I think it is that profound. But Desmond Tutu says this about the forgiveness aspect of what they decided to do. And I think it's so right and it's incredibly powerful. And so what I want us to understand today is this. He says, thus to forgive is indeed the best form of self-interest. I'm not forgiving even for that other person. This is about me. Thus to forgive is indeed the best form of self-interest, since anger, resentment, and revenge are corrosive of that greatest good. And what is that greatest good? Communal harmony that enhances the humanity and personhood of all in the community. Instead of saying, I have a right to exercise revenge and vengeance, instead he said, I have the right to exercise those things, but what I'm going to do instead is what is the greatest good for all of us, and that is we are going to forgive. This is unbelievably unheard of. And where it comes from, the root to this attitude in the African continent is this word here, Ubuntu. And I had heard of this not only from Desmond Tutu's book, but in a conversation that I listened in on with some pastors with a professor. She was just incredible, talking about the other and how her whole life pursuit was in reconciling these other communities. And she talked about this word as well, and it's this. It's I exist because I belong. It's this deep-seated sense of existence being because of the other people that I belong to. Not I think, therefore I am, but I belong, therefore I am. I'm here connected to these other people, and that is the root of my existence. And the reason that we would pursue reconciliation, right? This right here says the reason I pursue it is because without relationships, I cease to be real. And what Nelson Mandela and the people even on the other side who were in place and part of this agreement of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Council, what they were going for was this. And Desmond Tutu in his book, No Future Without Forgiveness, even alludes to other places in Africa where this was exercised, and things that should have been incredibly violent and vengeful ended up being reconciled peacefully. And we see this best and brightest in South Africa. They pursued reconciliation because of this idea that we truly belong to each other. And this is what was of the greatest good, and that is forgiveness. So today, real quickly, I want to talk about moving from you to I forgive you. Right? What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. The destination is reconciliation. The place that we're headed is a restoring of a relationship. Not just a letting it go in my own heart. No, it's I'm going to bear down on a process to get us to a restored relationship. And next week we're going to talk about the healing nature of this, when this is possible and when this happens. So the destination is reconciliation. The vehicle is truth. One of the great things about what they did in South Africa wasn't they just didn't go, okay, we forgive you, go about your way. No, what they did was they said, we're going to, again, there's a process here we're going to put in place, and part of that process is that victims and violators are going to come tell their stories and tell the truth. That there would be no truth without forgiveness. right? With forgiveness on the table, the people who had, in the name of their government, right, in the name of law and order, had done these egregious crimes against this particular racial group, they knew they would be forgiven, truly forgiven, if they told the truth. And so the vehicle to get them there was they were going to stand up and they were going to tell the truth about the egregious crimes that they had committed. Now, this carries its own weight, right? This is almost even its own sort of justice at a certain level. The idea of truth, but not just the violators. They wouldn't just tell their truth, but the victims would come forth and tell their truth. They would talk about their experiences. And just like Jesus said when he said that the truth will set you free, the reason the truth set you free is because there is no forgiveness without truth. And we're never truly free until we forgive and are forgiven. That this is all connected. So reconciliation is the destination. That's the goal. That's where we're headed. We're going to get there in the vehicle of truth, but the path is forgiveness. That's the road that we're going to travel. And it's a bumpy road, and it's got some windy turns, and it's not a straight shot, especially when we've been legitimately, deeply hurt. And I don't say any of this lightly. I don't say any of this not understanding the hurts that people go through. But I say all of this, looking to Jesus and looking at the story of South Africa and going, it is possible. And here's why we can and should do this. Because we are not the worst thing we've ever done, nor the worst thing that has ever been done to us. You see, a lot of times, we want to look at what's been done to us, or we want to look at what we've done, and we want to label ourselves as the violator or as the victim. And our identity can get rooted in that the longer we hold on to that. But that is not what has to define us. Forgiveness, when we take on that process, it forces us to look at the reality of our experiences. Again, truth. This is the reality of the experience. And then we get to decide if we'll hold on to it or if we'll let it go. If we'll let it define us, or if we'll say, no, I can be something more. That's what they did in South Africa, is they said, no, through forgiveness, we can be more, we can be better. And it's a hard process, but we can get there. We can restore relationships, and we can put this country back together in a way that very few ever have. And it's going to take truth. It's going to take reconciliation. It's going to take forgiveness. It's going to take reparations, even if only symbolic and not substantive. We're going to do the things that it takes because we're not going to let this history define us. We're going to create something new and a new legacy, and we can do that in our own life. And Jesus took so seriously forgiveness. He connects it. Our forgiveness to each other and our forgiveness with God. He connects them. He doesn't pull them apart. Just like love of God and love of our neighbor are equal in status. Like there's a sequence, right? Love God, love your neighbor. But he says they're equal. They're the same. We see the same thing with forgiveness when Jesus talks about it. Jesus considers it hugely important. And I want to look at just one thing he says this week, and the next week we're going to jump into a lot of things that Jesus says about forgiveness and the healing nature of it. But look what he says in Luke 17. He says, if another believer, and I love how sometimes Jesus does things globally, very broadly, and then sometimes he looks at this group that was following him as like this, hey, if you can exercise this here, maybe we can make it broader and bigger. He says, if another believer sins, rebuke that person. Let them know you sinned, you hurt somebody. Then if there is repentance, forgive. But then he takes it up a notch, right? Like everyone can go, okay, cool, thanks, Jesus. And then he says this, and this is where we start to resist and to buck and to push back. You ready? Look what he says. Even if that person wrongs you 7 times a day, and each time turns again and asks forgiveness, you must forgive. Well, they don't mean it when they say they're sorry. It doesn't matter. You must forgive. Yeah, but they hurt me. Forgive. Now that's some real heavy stuff to practice. That's not, like, again, I don't take this lightly. But clearly what Jesus is saying here is that your forgiveness isn't about that other person. Because if they were to keep doing it, I want you to keep forgiving. Why? Because the forgiveness is about you. And it's about your ability to pursue restoration and relationship. This is difficult, but we must be willing to forgive as often as we are in need of forgiveness. And isn't that really why we do it, right? What empathy tells us is I can forgive because I know I'm going to need it. I know I'm not perfect. I know I get it wrong. I know there's people out there who I've hurt. And just as much as I would love for them to forgive me, I want to do that now too. I'm going to extend the forgiveness that I wish to receive. And again, that's difficult. But it's good for us because forgiveness is a deeply spiritual act with profoundly physical results. What we do when we decide to embark on the process of relinquishing resentment with the goal of restoring relationship is not just good for that person. It's not even just good for our relationship. It is good for our own soul. Because we all know, as people have said over and over again, right? Revenge is like pouring a cup of poison for someone else and then drinking it yourself. Ultimately, it's killing you. Forgiveness is life-giving and restorative. And just like the example of South Africa, where they said, we're going to choose forgiveness, we're going to choose restoration rather than resentment and revenge and exercising our power the way they exercise their power. We're going to forgive. And yes, there's truth. Yes, we gotta be clear about what happened. We don't deny it. We don't just let it go and pretend it didn't happen. We get in there, we dig in as violators and victims, and we admit the truth. We see it and we forgive anyways. And we repair and we do what it takes. Why? Because there's profoundly physical results. Our lives, our relationships are changed. Isn't that what we all really want? Don't we all want to be in right relationship with people? Whether we're the victim or the violator. Whether it's I forgive you or please forgive me. Let's pursue forgiveness. And let's talk about that a little bit today. I'm going to